Hello, my dear students. How are you? I think all of you are very well by the grace of God. How do you pass the days of quarantine or lockdown? I hope all of you stay at home. It is very, very important for your safety. However, today I have prepared your class on sentences. And especially we will put emphasis on the structural pattern of sentence. However, before starting sentence, we will discuss clauses, because if you want to reach the sea, you have to go there through rivers. In the same way, if you want to understand the structural pattern of sentences, obviously you have to learn what is a clause very well. Now, if I ask you a question, what is a clause? What will be your answer? Let's see it. Rohim eats rice. Rohim sings in the morning. Rohim walks slowly. When you win, say nothing. Here we see some inscriptions on the board. Rohim eats rice. This is a clause. Look at the board, my dear students. Here we see eats. It is the verb. Rohim, this is the subject, and rice, this is the object. In the second expression, Rohim sings in the morning. Rohim is the subject, sings is the verb, and in the morning, this is a phrase. This is basically an adverbial phrase term. In the third expression, we see Rohim walks slowly. Here, Rohim is the subject, walks is the verb, and slowly is an adverb and it modifies the verb. In the fourth expression, we see when you win, say nothing. So there are four expressions, but there are 5 clauses. In the first expression, Rohim eats rice, this is a single clause. In the second expression, Rohim sings in the morning, here we see there is the verb, there is the subject, and there is an adverbial phrase. In the first expression, we see that there is a subject, there is a verb, and there is an object. In the third expression, Rohim walks slowly, we see there is a subject, there is a verb, and there is an adverb. It is basically a complement. In the fourth expression, we see when you win, say nothing. It is also divided into 2 parts. When you win, this part has a subject, a verb, and the second part, say nothing, it also has a subject and a verb. So if I ask you a question, what is a clause? And there are 4 expressions. In the 4 expressions, there are 5 clauses. Rohim eats rice, this is a clause. Rohim sings in the morning, this is also another clause. Rohim walks slowly, this is also a clause. And when you win, this is a clause, and say nothing, this is also another clause. So there are 4 expressions, but there are 5 clauses. So what is a clause? A clause is basically a group of words that must have a subject and a finite verb. So what is a clause? A clause is a group of words that must have a subject and a finite verb. তার মানে হচ্ছে একটা ক্লজ গঠনের সর্বনিম্ন শর্ত হচ্ছে তার মধ্যে একটি সাবজেক্ট থাকবে এবং একটা finite verb থাকবে. Clauses are of 2 types: independent clause and dependent clause. Independent clause is also called principal clause, and dependent clause is also called subordinate clause. Let's have a glimpse into it. I know where Rohim was born. Here there are 2 types of clauses. I know, this portion is called principal clause, and where Rohim was born, this portion is called subordinate clause or dependent clause. Why this portion is called dependent clause and why this portion is called independent clause? There must be a reason behind it. If a clause can express any view without taking the help of anything else or any other clauses, this clause is called independent clause or principal clause. That means principal clause does not need help. It is a self-sufficient clause. I know. this portion or this clause expresses a view very clearly. I know, আমি জানি. Where Rohim was born, in Bengali, it is like যেখানে রহিম জন্মেছে. So, যেখানে রহিম জন্মেছে, it does not express a view clearly. If I say where he was born, obviously there must be something that must come to remove the incompleteness of the portion where he was born. So where he was born, this is also a clause because this has a subject and this also has a verb. This is a clause, but it cannot express its meaning clearly. It needs the help of this portion. So where he was born, this portion totally depends on I know or that portion. So if a clause can express a meaning clearly, it is called a principal clause. And if a clause cannot express a meaning clearly, and if it depends on another clause for its meaning, this clause is called a subordinate clause or dependent clause. So clauses are of two types, independent clause or principal clause that does not need the help of any other thing or any other clauses, and dependent clause or subordinate clause. It means a clause that depends on the principal clause. If you go there, I will come. In this sentence, if you go there, this is a subordinate clause or this is a dependent clause. And I will come, this is an independent clause or this is a principal clause. Look, my dear students, there is a very, very technical term. Always remember, a subordinate clause or a dependent clause must start with a connector. Here, if is the connector and here, where is the connector. So, we must remember or we always keep in our mind a very, very important technical matter that a subordinate clause always starts with a connector. And what is a subordinate clause? Dependent clause is subordinate clause. And what is the principal clause? Independent clause or স্বাধীন clause. This is a principal clause. So clauses are of two types, principal clause and subordinate clause, independent clause or dependent clause. And dependent clause starts with a connector. Now, if I ask you a question, what is a sentence? What will be your answer? A sentence is also a group of words that expresses a complete sense. আবারও বলছি, a sentence is a group of words that express a complete sense. তার মানে সেন্টেন্স হচ্ছে একটা গ্রুপ অফ ওয়ার্ডস এবং যেটা একটা পূর্ণ সেন্স বা বোধ প্রকাশ করে. So what is the difference between sentence and clause? In a sentence, there must be a clause. That means in a sentence, there must be the presence of a single clause or more than one clauses. That means clause is the smallest unit of sentence. And in a sentence, there may be a single clause, there may be more than one clauses. Look at the first sentence. I know Korean. This is a sentence. And because it has a subject, has a finite verb, and it expresses a complete sense. On the other hand, we can say that it is a single clause. Yes, a single clause can be a sentence if that single clause is a principal clause. I know Korean. This is a principal clause because it is self-sufficient. So, this is a single claused sentence. But here, I know Rohim, who is a hero. আমি রহিমকে চিনি, যে একটা নায়ক. There are two clauses, but there is a single sentence. That means, in a sentence, there may be more than one clauses. Okay? Because a sentence may have a single clause or a sentence may have more than one clauses. So what is a sentence? A sentence is a group of words. A sentence must expresses a sense. A sentence may have a single clause or more than one clauses, and if the number of clause in a sentence is one, obviously that clause must be a principal clause. তার মানে একটি সেন্টেন্সের হচ্ছে একদল শব্দ, যে শব্দগুলো দ্বারা একটা কমপ্লিট সেন্স প্রকাশ করে, এবং একটা সেন্টেন্সের মধ্যে একটা ক্লজও থাকতে পারে, একাধিক ক্লজও থাকতে পারে। কথা হচ্ছে যদি একটা সেন্টেন্সের মধ্যে একটা ক্লজ থাকে তাহলে সেই ক্লজটা অবশ্যই প্রিন্সিপাল ক্লজ হবে, আর যদি একাধিক ক্লজ থাকে তখন সেটা আলাদা হিসাব। So we know that a sentence is a group of words and it expresses a sense. It may have a single clause or it may have more than one clauses. If we want to make a discussion on the structural patterns of sentences, we can say that there are 4 types of sentences: simple sentence, complex sentence, compound sentence, and compound complex sentence. But most of the students know that there are 3 types of sentences: simple sentence, compound sentence, and complex sentence. Normally, we drop the presence of compound complex sentences. However, today I will make a discussion on the first 3 types of sentences. That means simple sentence, complex sentence, and compound sentence. In our discussion, the matter of simple sentence comes first. What is a simple sentence? A simple answer is that a simple sentence has only a principal clause and it expresses a complete sense. Look at the board. I like his dog. আমি তার কুকুরটাকে খুব পছন্দ করি. This is a single clause and this is a principal clause or independent clause, and this is a simple sentence. So in a simple sentence you can see only a single clause, that is a principal clause. So if you want to remember the definition of a simple sentence, there is a very shortcut way. The shortcut way is that you have to judge a sentence on the basis of clause, on the basis of the clauses that are present in the sentence. So in a simple sentence there must be a principal clause. So what is a simple sentence? I can say that if any sentence contains only a principal clause, it can be called a simple sentence. Look at the second sentence. You cannot surprise a man with a dog. You cannot surprise a man with a dog. This sentence is larger than that, but this is also a simple sentence because it is also a single claused sentence. So if any sentence contains only one principal clause or only one clause, that sentence is called a simple sentence. And in a simple sentence there must be a principal clause and that must express a complete sense. Now if I ask a question, what is a compound sentence? What will be your answer? A compound sentence is such a sentence that must have at least 2 independent clauses or principal clauses. There may be more than 2 independent or principal clauses in a compound sentence, but the first condition of a compound sentence is that there must be at least 2 principal or independent clauses. Let's have a glimpse into it. Rohim is a good boy and he is very brave. There are 2 independent clauses or principal clauses. The first independent clause is Rohim is a good boy, and the second independent clause is he is very brave. And the 2 independent clauses are connected by a connector. Yes, certain type of connector is needed to construct a compound sentence. That means if you want to construct a compound sentence, you have to depend on 2 conditions. There must be independent clauses or principal clauses, and those principal clauses should be joined together with the help of a special type of connector that is called co-ordinating conjunctions. Here the word and is a connector. What type of connector? It is a connector that connects together 2 principal clauses, and this type of connector is called co-ordinating connectors. Co-ordinating connectors means, or co-ordinating conjunctions mean, that type of conjunction that basically connects together 2 clauses of equal rank. That means coordinating conjunctions are the conjunctions that connect together two independent clauses and that produce a compound sentence. Major coordinating conjunctions are for, and, nor, but, or, so, yet, either or, neither nor, etc. So from this discussion, we have come to some points. Those points are: a compound sentence must have two or more than two principal clauses, and those principal clauses must be connected by a special type of connector, that is coordinating conjunction. So if I tell, if you see the presence of coordinating conjunctions in a sentence, obviously that sentence may be a compound sentence. That means if you want to know what are the conjunctions that connect together the compound sentences, those connectors are for, and, nor, but, or, so, yet, either or, neither nor, etc. If you see the presence of those type of connectors in a sentence, and if you see that those type of connectors connect together two clauses, that sentence must be a compound sentence. So a compound sentence is a combination of two or more than two principal clauses. তাহলে একটা compound sentence হচ্ছে দুই বা দুইয়ের অধিক প্রিন্সিপাল অর ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্ট ক্লজের একটা সেন্টেন্স, এবং যাদের মধ্যে এই প্রিন্সিপাল ক্লজগুলোকে কে জোড়া দিয়ে রাখবে, একটা বিশেষ কানেক্টর। সেই কানেক্টরটার নাম কি? সেই কানেক্টরটার নাম হচ্ছে কোঅর্ডিনেটিং কনজাংশন। তাহলে আমরা কোঅর্ডিনেটিং কনজাংশনের উপস্থিতি দেখে বুঝতে পারবো যে এটা কম্পাউন্ড সেন্টেন্স। নাও we will make a discussion on complex sentence. What is a complex sentence? A complex sentence is a sentence that must have a principal clause or independent clause and at least one subordinate clause. তার মানে হচ্ছে একটা প্রিন্সিপাল ক্লজ থাকবে এবং কমপক্ষে একটি সাবঅর্ডিনেট ক্লজ অথবা ডিপেন্ডেন্ট ক্লজ থাকবে একটা কমপ্লেক্স সেন্টেন্সে। সো হোয়াট ইজ এ কমপ্লেক্স সেন্টেন্স? এ কমপ্লেক্স সেন্টেন্স ইজ এ সেন্টেন্স দ্যাট হ্যাজ আ প্রিন্সিপাল ক্লজ and that must have at least one subordinate clause. Yes, there may be more than one subordinate clauses in a complex sentence. Look at the board. I can do it if you come. This is a complex sentence, and here the principal clause or independent clause is I can do it, and the subordinate clause is if you come. Here we see that the principal clause comes first and subordinate clause follows it. In the second sentence, though he worked hard, he failed in the exam. Here, though he worked hard, this is the subordinate clause or dependent clause. He failed in the exam. This is the independent clause or principal clause. Here we see that the subordinate clause or dependent clause comes first. Look at the third sentence. In fact, that he is honest is known to all. The fact that he is honest is known to all. Here the subordinate clause is that he is honest and the principal clause is the fact is known to all. So here we see that the subordinate clause is placed within the principal clause. So there is a fact here which is very important. A subordinate clause can be placed before the principal clause, after the principal clause or within the principal clause. তার মানে সাবঅর্ডিনেট ক্লজটা প্রিন্সিপাল ক্লজের আগে বসতে পারে, পরেও বসতে পারে, এমনকি প্রিন্সিপাল ক্লজের পেটের মধ্যেও কে বসতে পারে? সাবঅর্ডিনেট ক্লজটা বসতে পারে। There is also another very important thing. Look at the board, my dear students. If you come, this is a subordinate clause or dependent clause. Look, it starts with if. This is a connector. Though he worked hard, this is also a subordinate clause, and it starts with a connector, though. In the third sentence, that he is honest, this is also a subordinate clause or dependent clause, and it starts with a connector, that is that. That means a subordinate clause always starts with a connector, and that connector adds the subordinate clause with the principal clause. So in a complex sentence, there must be a principal clause and there is at least a subordinate clause. There may be more than one subordinate clauses in a complex sentence. On the other hand, the subordinate clause can be placed before the principal clause, after the principal clause, or within the principal clause. And the subordinate clause starts with a connector. There are three types of connectors that are used in a complex sentence, and those connectors connect together the subordinate clause with the principal clause. তার মানে তিন ধরনের কানেক্টর লাগে একটা কমপ্লেক্স সেন্টেন্সে। The first type of connector is subordinating conjunction. The chief subordinating conjunctions are after, because, if, that, though, although, till, before, unless, as, then, etc. The second type of conjunction, second type of connectors that are used in a complex sentence is relative pronoun. Which are relative pronouns? Who, which, whom, what, that, whose, etc. Those are called relative pronouns. And the third type of connectors that are used to construct a complex sentence is relative adverb. The major relative adverbs are where, when, how, why, whatever, whenever, etc. So, in a complex sentence, we use three types of connectors: subordinating conjunctions, relative pronoun, and relative adverb. If you see the presence of subordinating conjunction, relative pronoun, or relative adverb, obviously that sentence can be a complex sentence. There is also another type of sentence. This is called compound complex sentence. The condition of compound complex sentence is that there must be at least two independent or principal clauses and at least one subordinate clause. There may be more than two principal clauses, there may be more than one subordinate clauses, but in a compound complex sentence there must be at least two principal clauses and at least one subordinate clause. Let's see an example. When a dog bites a man, that is not news, but if a man bites a dog, that is news. In this sentence, we see there are two independent or principal clauses. The first independent clause is that is not news, and the second independent clause is that is news. And here there are two subordinate clauses: when a dog bites a man and if a man bites a dog. So in this compound complex sentence we see there are two principal clauses and two subordinate clauses. But the first requirement of a compound complex sentence is that there must be at least two principal clauses. There may be more than two principal clauses. There is also at least a subordinate clause. Yes, there may be more than one subordinate clauses. That is not the question. তাহলে একটা কম্পাউন্ড কমপ্লেক্স সেন্টেন্সের বৈশিষ্ট্য কি? এখানে অবশ্যই দুটো প্রিন্সিপাল ক্লজ থাকবে, অর্থাৎ দুটো ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্ট ক্লজ থাকবে এবং কমপক্ষে একটা সাবঅর্ডিনেট ক্লজ অথবা ডিপেন্ডেন্ট ক্লজ থাকবে। Basically, a sentence has two types of structures: the deep structure and the surface structure. What is deep structure? Deep structure is basically based on meaning. That means the meaning of the sentence constructs its deep structure. And what is surface structure? Surface structure is related to outward construction of a sentence. So if I say that we will transform a sentence into simple, from simple to complex, or from complex to compound, we are basically dealing with the surface structure, not the deep structure. That means the meaning is always the same. Meaning means deep structure, and outward structure means surface structure. Look at the first sentence. I know his name. আমি তার নামটি জানি. This is the meaning. This is the deep structure. And if I request you to transform the sentence into a simple, complex sentence or into a compound sentence, what will be your answer? Now, if you want to transform the simple sentence into a complex sentence, what will you do? You will, at first you have to think that you have to divide the sentence into two parts. This is your first thought. And one part will be principal clause and another part will be subordinate clause. And the subordinate clause must start with a a special type of connector, and that connector may be a subordinating conjunction, may be a relative pronoun, or may be a relative adverb. So at the time of transformation of sentence, or at the time of transforming one sentence into another on the basis of a structure, you have to remind in your mind that there are three types of connectors in a complex sentence, and you have to use one of them as per necessity. So here, look, my dear students, I know his name. This is a simple sentence. If I convert the sentence into a complex sentence without changing the meaning, that means without changing the deep structure, what will be it? It will be, I know what his name is. Here, I know, this portion is principal clause, and what his name is, this portion is subordinate clause. So, I know his name, আমি তার নাম জানি। পরেরটা কি হচ্ছে? I know, আমি জানি। What his name is, তার নাম কি হয়? That means there is no change in meaning, only change in outward expression, outward structure. If I ask you to transform the simple sentence into a compound word, compound sentence, what will be your answer? You have to at first think that you have to divide the sentence into two parts, and both the parts will be a principal clause, and the principal clause will be connected with each other with the help of a special type of connector, that is co-ordinating conjunction. So, at the time of converting a sentence into a compound one, obviously you have to use coordinating conjunctions, and at the time of converting a sentence into a complex one, you have to use subordinating conjunctions, relative adverb, or relative pronoun. That means at the time of transformation, obviously you will be very careful about the use of connectors. Connectors will help you to transform your sentences into different forms. So the simple sentence is, I know his name. Then this is a principal clause, and I divide the principal clause into two sections, and the first section is I know, and the second section is what his name is. And what his name is, this is subordinate clause, and I know, this is principal clause. So it becomes a complex sentence, and afterwards I divide the sentence into two principal clauses. That is, he has a name, তার একটি নাম আছে, and I know it, আমি এটা জানি, and both the sentences are principal clauses, and they are connected with the help of and. And is a subordinating conjunction. So subordinating and is a coordinating conjunctions, and coordinating conjunctions always produce compound sentences. But if I analyze the second sentence, I know what his name is. Here we see that no, this is not a coordinating conjunction. This is not a coordinating conjunction, rather this is a relative pronoun. What is a relative pronoun? So, relative pronoun, relative adverb, and subordinating conjunctions produce complex sentence. Look at the sentence. The man is reported as a terrorist. এই মানুষটা সম্পর্কে বলা হচ্ছে যে সে একজন সন্ত্রাসী. This is a simple sentence. Why it is a simple sentence? Because there is only a principal clause. The man is reported as a terrorist. Only one principal clause is here, and it makes it a simple sentence. If I ask you to transform it into a complex one, what will be your answer? The man who is reported is a terrorist. The man who is reported is a terrorist. Here, who is reported, this section is called subordinate clause or dependent clause. And the man is a terrorist, this section is called principal clause or independent clause. Look, my dear students, here the subordinate clause is placed within the principal clause. That means principal clause এর পেটের মধ্যে subordinate clause টা বসে আছে. The subordinate clause starts with who? This is a connector, and this is a relative pronoun, and it shows you that this is a complex sentence. And if I ask you to transform the sentence into a compound one, you have to think that you need to divide the sentences into two parts, and both the parts will be principal clauses or independent clauses. Look, the man is a terrorist. This is the first principal clause. It is reported. This is the second principal clause. And they are connected by and. What is and? And is a coordinating conjunction. And coordinating conjunctions are used in what? They are used in compound sentences. So, at the time of transforming a sentence into another one, you need to judge clauses, you need to judge connectors. Simple sentence must have a principal clause. Complex sentence must have a principal clause, one or more than one subordinate clauses, and compound sentence must have at least two principal clauses or more than two clauses. And in a complex sentence, you must use relative pronoun, relative adverb or subordinating conjunctions as connectors. And in compound sentences, you must use coordinating conjunctions as connectors. Our third sentence is, seeing a snake, the boy began to run. সাপটাকে দেখেই ছেলেটা দৌড় মারলো. That means this is a simple sentence. And it is a simple sentence because here we see only one principal clause. Seeing a snake, the boy began to run. There is only one principal clause. And if we transform the sentence into a complex one, what will be it? When the boy saw a snake, যখনই ছেলেটা সাপটাকে দেখলো, he began to run. সে দৌড় মারলো. Here, when the boy saw a snake, this is the subordinate clause portion. And he began to run, this is principal clause. And the subordinate clause starts with a connector when, যখন. This is a relative adverb. And if we transform the sentence into a compound one, what will be it? The boy saw a snake and he began to run. The boy saw a snake and he began to run. So here we see there are two principal clauses. The boy saw a snake and he began to run. And the two principal clauses are added to each other with the help of and. And is a coordinating conjunction. That means the three sentences have the same meaning, but their outward appearance is different. That means the deep structure is the same, but the surface structure is different. Our fourth sentence is, the patient is too weak to walk. তার মানে হচ্ছে patient এত দুর্বল যে হাঁটতে পারছে না. This is the deep structure. This is the meaning. And this sentence, the patient is too weak to walk. This is a simple sentence because there is only a principal clause. And if we transform the sentence into a complex one, obviously we have to divide the principal clause into two sections, principal clause and subordinate clause. What will be it? The patient is so weak. This is the principal clause section. That he cannot walk. This is the subordinate clause section. And the subordinate clause section starts with that. Compound. The patient is very weak. This is principal clause 1. He cannot run. This is principal clause 2. And they are connected with the help of and. And is a coordinating conjunction. So here we see that when we transform one sentence into another, we have to understand the meaning first. We have to understand the meaning first. Then we have to judge the clauses. That to which clause I will transform. And then we have to remember the connectors. What type of connectors are needed here? Please try to understand the meaning of the sentence first. Don't memorize the rules. Most of the students memorize the rules, but they do not understand how to analyze a sentence into different clauses, how to use different types of connectors. And for this reason, you cannot understand transformation of sentences. Memorization cannot lead you to success. Only great understanding, analysis can lead you to success. The fifth sentence is that I live in a house belonging to my uncle. This is a simple sentence because it has only one principal clause. If I request you to transform it into a complex one, what will you think? You need to divide the sentence into two parts. One part will be a principal clause and the other part will be a subordinate clause. And the subordinate clause must start with a connector, and the connector must be a relative adverb or a relative pronoun or a subordinating conjunction. I live in a house that belongs to my uncle. Here the principal clause is I live in a house, and the subordinate clause is that belongs to my uncle. And the subordinate clause starts with that, and it is a relative pronoun here. And if I transform the sentence into a complex one, what will be it? I live in a house, compound one. I live in a house and it belongs to my uncle. That means I live in a house, principal clause. It belongs to my uncle. This is also another principal.